Good morning everyone and welcome to this new video. Today I'm going to deal with a US psychologist who with his theory of psychosocial development left a mark also from an educational pathway point of view. I am in fact talking about Erikson. Erikson, together with other US psychoanalyst colleagues, finds himself somewhat creating a link, a bridge, between what was the classical European psychoanalytic school and what instead becomes the psychoanalytic school in the United States. So he takes classical notions, precisely these European psychoanalytic roots, and integrates them with new ideas. Erikson starts from Freud's theories and connects them to sociology, so then trying to revise their implications and broaden their horizons a little bit. Freud, with his theory of psychosexual development, which I have already covered in another video and which I leave here in the info box should you want to catch up with it, had theorized that the child's psychic and sexual development went hand in hand. And he had theory said above all that in the first 6 years of life there were 3 phases sequential to each other, and then the oral phase, the anal phase, and the phallic phase, followed then by a latency phase that then introduced puberty. These phases, sequential to each other according to Freud, were fundamental to the psychic development of the child, so with the passing, shall we say, in correct manner of one phase, then accessing the other until a healthy development of a healthy adult. Erikson, in the works Childhood and Society of 1950 and Youth and Identity Crisis of 1968, takes this theory and extends it to the entire lifespan of the human being, but transforms it into 8 stages of psychosocial development of the child. Why psychosocial? Because for him, the interaction that the child has within the social context in which he finds himself becomes fundamental. Each of these stages then can be traced back to a specific moment in the child's development and therefore also to a specific moment in the educational journey that the child will have. These 8 stages that Erikson talks about become truly fundamental because they are 8 fundamental states, 8 fundamental steps in the growth of the human being. Each of these stages is characterized by a psychosocial crisis of 2 forces that are opposed to each other and come into conflict with each other. However, these stages differ from Freud's because, as we have already said, Freud's are concerned with the psychosexual development of the child, whereas Erikson makes these stages coincide in the interaction between the individual, as we have said, and the society and people with whom he or she comes into contact. Each of these 8 stages that Erikson talks about, thus stages of development of the human being, draws its origins and builds on the previous ones. And so we can say that in some way Erikson has traced out a real life path from birth to old age of the human being. For Erikson, each stage therefore is characterized by a conflict, and this conflict has a very important function because it serves as a turning point precisely for the human being, and precisely to, by overcoming it, arrive at the new stage of life. These conflicts focus each time on the development of a psychological quality, and therefore in each stage the potential for growth is very high, but also the possibility of failure. When the individual succeeds in successfully overcoming this conflict, he can move on to the next stage stronger than before, and having strengthened these psychological qualities that will serve him precisely to meet the challenges of life later on. And if, on the other hand, on the contrary, he cannot successfully overcome this conflict, he may not create these psychological foundations for himself to then face the challenges that will come in the next stages and thus find himself then stranded. Now quickly we will try to see what these 8 stages are and what they are characterized by. So what is this conflict, this sort of dichotomy that characterizes stage by stage? The first stage, called oral sensory, is from about 0 to 1 year of age, and the conflict that arises in this stage is that of trust or distrust. The trust that has to be created in this period, so what happens in this period, is in some way the attachment to the figure that is responsible for the child, in most cases the mother figure, the mother who becomes precisely the key element of secure attachment for the child itself. The second stage is from about 2 to 3 years of age, and it is called the muscle anal stage, and it is the one in which the conflict that arises is between autonomy or a sense of shame. In fact, in this period, the child develops new skills that make him more autonomous, for example, even that of sphincter control, and so the child somehow learns to control himself, but if the treatment is inadequate, he may develop precisely this sense of shame. The third stage is from age 4 to 5, and it is called locomotor genital, and it is the one characterized by the dichotomy initiative or guilt. It is the one where the child begins to organize more purposeful activities, also becomes more aggressive, the one also where the Oedipus complex towards the same-sex parent can lead to guilt. Then there is the fourth stage, which is the one from 6 to 12 years old and is called the latency stage, and where the dichotomy is industriousness or inferiority. It is the one where the child learns all the basic norms, school skills, even those skills that help him build the first things that he can use for school as well. Then there is the fifth stage, which is puberty or adolescence, which is from age 13 to 18, and it is the stage of dichotomy identity or role confusion. In this stage, the boy begins to adapt self-awareness to the changes due to puberty and adolescence itself, and each boy begins to achieve an adult sexual identity and also begins to seek new values. Then there is the stage of youth, which is 19 to 25 years old, and where the dichotomy, intimacy or isolation is present. And that is the phase where young people establish one or more intimate relationships which go beyond just teenage love affairs, and also to create a new family unit for themselves. Then there is the adult phase, which is from the age of 26 to 40, and it is the phase of generativity or stagnation, where the young adult gives birth to new children, focuses on career, professional achievements, and so on. Then there is the stage of maturity, which goes from 41 to beyond, and it is the stage characterized by the dichotomy integrity or despair. It is the stage basically where the human being reflects, integrates all the previous stages, and finds agreement with his basic identity and basically accepts himself. In illustrating these stages, you will have been able to see that in each of these stages there is a dichotomy that the human being is in some way forced to overcome, and as I said before, it has the functionality for Erikson, by overcoming it, to then be able to deal with the subsequent stages in a psychologically stronger way and to be precisely more ready for this. What are the assumptions from which Erikson starts to develop this theory? The first is that surely, in principle, every human being develops his or her personality on the basis of overcoming successive stages, one after the other. The other assumption is that interaction with society fosters and preserves the natural order of development. The educational process becomes fundamental for Erikson, and it is not in the shaping of an amorphous individual, but instead it is precisely in the development of a personality that follows its own laws and nature, but always in response to what is the environment around it, and thus how fundamental it becomes is the interaction with the social environment in which the child himself is. Education, especially primary education, thus becomes fundamental because the mediation of adults can, according to Erikson, help to fix personality traits in the child growing up. It then also becomes interesting to compare, according to the author, different societies that educate their children differently, giving more importance to some aspects than others, and thus consequently encouraging some behaviors and discouraging others, and contextualize then as adults behaviors, for example, of important historical figures who grew up that way and acted that way as perhaps influenced by their home culture. Well, with this talk on the educational aspect of Erikson, my video today is over. If you have any questions, you can ask me as usual in the comments below. I salute you, thank you for your attention, and see you in the next video.